So, does the Bible have anything to say about slavery?
It does, and I think it's really important for people to understand that when the Bible talks about slavery, it's in, especially like the Old Testament. So when we look at the Old Testament, and you have some of these Bible verses that talk about taking slaves, and here's what you do when you have a slave, and people are going like, what is that all about? Because our understanding of slavery as Americans is the chattel slavery in the antebellum South. And but what we have to understand is that the Bible is translated, the Old Testament particularly, from Hebrew into English. And so they have to make a choice, like what word do we use to describe what's happening? And they in a lot of Bibles, it'll say slavery. I think some says servant. But what we have to understand is that the actual type of quote unquote slavery that God instituted in the Old Testament is nothing like what we understand slavery to be in America. Right. It was actually more like a way for very poor and destitute people to work their way up and out of poverty. So back then, you couldn't just go get a job at Starbucks and get an apartment. People lived in families, they lived together. And so if crops failed, if things happened and you were kind of destitute, what are you going to do? And so if you might borrow from somebody, if you owe somebody, God instituted this system where you could actually go live in their house, work for them for 7 years, and try to pay off your debt. And then at the end of 7 years, they were commanded to let them go with generous gifts of flocks and grain and wine. And so this is a much different type of situation. In fact, it's actually not that it was perfect, but God was working with what they had back then in the cultural times. So it was really a way to protect people, and so that they could not be destitute and just die. They could go live with somebody and essentially work their way up and out of the poverty that they found themselves in. So it's really important to understand it in that context. Now in the New Testament, it's the Romans, the slavery in the Greco-Roman world was a little bit different. But when we look at the trajectory of Scripture, it's always moving toward people's freedom, right? It's never, in fact, Paul condemned slave traders. Kidnapping human beings in the Old Testament was punishable by death. So you couldn't do that kind of stuff like what we did in America. In fact, it was actually those scriptures that led people like William Wilberforce and others to fight slavery and lead the movement of abolition.
I think that that's really important and helpful for us to understand, is that not only does the Bible condemn kidnapping and man-stealing and slavery as we think of slavery, it's because of the Bible. It was the Bible-believing Christians that actually read that, wait a minute, that's not my slave, he's my brother. She's right. My sister. She's made in the image of God just like I am, and we need to work together to fulfill the Great Commission.
Yeah.
And we can't do that if we're enslaving one another.
Right. I actually watched a video of the ESV Translation Committee. They're debating whether or not they should change the word slave to servant in the ESV. So I know that there are these kinds of discussions happening among the scholars who are translating, because they realize that doesn't mean what we think it means when we hear that word.